Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Grandma's house stood at the end of a narrow alley, between two old buildings that seemed to lean forward, whispering to each other. The stone walls, blackened by time, told forgotten stories, and the wind whistled through the poorly fitted shutters as if to warn of a foreign presence lurking nearby. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of dried herbs and memories accumulated over decades. Grandma, sitting in her old, cracked leather armchair, knitted with measured slowness, savoring the comforting warmth of the hearth. Little did she know that that evening, the peaceful world she knew would be turned upside down. A sudden creak echoed through the hall. Her heart leaped, but she remained still, listening intently. Then, the door creaked. Someone was entering. Soft footsteps creaked across the old parquet floor, breaking the silence like a warning. She rose slowly, her hands trembling but resolute, and watched the shadow slip behind the curtains. Without being able to imagine what she would do, one certainty dawned on her: this house, which had sheltered so many secrets and so much laughter, would not be invaded without a fight. Grandmother knew she had to draw upon resources she thought she had forgotten, because tonight, her life and the life of her home were at stake. And in the shadows, the intruders were unaware that they had just awakened a mind more cunning and determined than they could ever have imagined. Grandmother gripped the handle of her cane tightly, finding it much more secure than a simple support. Her eyes scanned the darkness of the hall, where shadows moved like specters. Every creak of the floorboards made her hold her breath, but she refused to back down. Suddenly, a figure emerged near the front door. A young man, clearly in a hurry, was rummaging through drawers and shelves, unaware of the old woman's presence. He didn't know that he had just awakened more than just a resident, he had just unleashed a force he could neither measure nor control. Grandma took a deep breath, her mind calculating each movement. She knew running would be futile. Here, every corner and every piece of furniture could become an ally. Slowly, she glided into the kitchen, grabbed an old rolling pin, and returned to the hall, silent as a cat's shadow. The young man knelt to open a low drawer. Without a word, she raised her improvised weapon and struck the floor just behind him. The noise startled the intruder, who turned abruptly, discovering the old woman only a few steps away, her gaze fierce and determined. "Who are you?" she murmured in a firm but surprisingly clear voice. The thief, taken aback, stammered out apologies. But Grandma wasn't looking for an argument. Every second counted. With surprising speed for her age, she forced the young man back away, pushing him towards the door, her movements precise and calculated. In a mixture of fear and admiration, he realized that he had underestimated this house, and especially the woman who was its guardian. And as he fled, dropping a few things behind him, Grandma knew this was only the beginning. Tonight, her house had been invaded, but she had just shown anyone who dared enter that here, the law was hers. The house was silent again, but a heavy silence, as if laden with menace. Grandmother ran her fingers along the sill of the front door, noting the scratches left by the fleeing young man. Her mind, sharp despite her years, understood immediately: this was not an isolated incident. Someone, or several people, had targeted her house, and they might return. She went to the living room and inspected every room. The drawers had been ransacked, objects moved, a window left ajar, everything showed they knew exactly what they were looking for. Grandma felt a shiver run down her spine, but she refused to give in to fear. She had to understand who and why. Sitting at the kitchen table, she pulled out an old notebook filled with notes, numbers, and memories. For years, she had kept discreet contacts and information about the neighborhood residents, strange visitors, and unusual events. Tonight, she would use all that accumulated knowledge. She quickly noted the thief's details: his silhouette, his manner of moving, his hesitations. Every gesture, every sound she caught became a clue. Then she looked around, as if the walls themselves could speak. The old photographs and knickknacks seemed to remind her that this house had already witnessed many trials, and that no one would break it easily. Then a faint noise caught her attention. Was it the wind or a footstep? Grandmother stood up, cane in hand, and approached the half-open window. Through the slightly cracked glass, she glimpsed a distant figure disappearing behind the garden trees. A shiver ran through her, someone was watching her. She then understood one thing: it wasn't simply a burglary. It was targeted. Someone wanted something in particular, something she had kept for a long time. Grandma made a decision. If the intruders returned, she wouldn't simply be an old woman caught off guard in her armchair. She would prepare her house, prepare her defenses, and above all, prepare her counterattack. For tonight, she had learned that beneath her wrinkles lay a strength that no one would dare underestimate again. The next morning, the house seemed peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, and the familiar scent of dried herbs still filled the air. But Grandma knew that calm was deceptive. The intruders probably hadn't given up, they were perhaps planning their next move. She moved through the rooms with methodical precision. Every piece of furniture was repositioned to block certain passages, every everyday object became a potential tool for defense. Pots and pans were placed in strategic locations, lamps positioned to momentarily blind an intruder. Even the rugs and curtains were used to slow down or surprise a visitor. Grandma also took out her old notebook and began to draw up a mental map of the house, the entry points, the hidden passages, the corners where one could observe without being seen. She knew that knowledge of her territory was her greatest advantage. Then she positioned herself by the living room window, watching the garden and the alley. Every sound, every shadow, every suspicious movement was registered in her mind. Her intuition, honed by years of experience and vigilance, told her they would return before the end of the week. To make sure she wasn't alone, she activated a small, old-fashioned phone connected to a few trusted neighbors. They were few and far between, but she knew they would come if things got out of hand. Everything was in place: the house, the vigilance, the plan. Evening fell, and with it the shadow of memories and threat. Grandmother sat down in her armchair, cane within reach, every muscle tense and every sense on high alert. She was no longer the old woman the intruders had seen the day before. She was ready. And in the street, a few meters away, two figures slipped silently by, observing the house like predators. They were unaware that the prey they had underestimated had already prepared its trap. The game had begun. Night had fallen, and a heavy silence enveloped the house. Grandmother, sitting in her armchair near the living room, was on high alert. Every creak of the old floorboards, every breath of wind against the shutters, heightened her vigilance. She knew they would return. And they returned. This time, it wasn't just one intruder but two figures who slid along the exterior wall, approaching the living room window. One of them pulled out a screwdriver and gently forced the lock. Grandma held her breath, her fingers gripping her cane like a sword. When the window gave way, she activated an improvised mechanism she had prepared. A bucket of soapy water tipped over, splashing the two intruders and sending them sliding across the garden. The impact was enough to make them momentarily lose their balance, and Grandma took advantage of the situation to leap out. "You're in my house," she exclaimed in a firm, piercing voice. The intruders, startled, got to their feet grumbling, but the old woman didn't give them time to think. With a speed one would never have imagined for someone her age, she struck one of them with her cane, pushing him back towards the door. The other, hesitating, was lured into a room where she had strategically placed ropes and chairs to slow his progress. Every gesture of Grandma was precise, every movement calculated. She didn't act with brute force but with ingenuity and a perfect knowledge of her territory. The intruders, used to easy prey, discovered with horror that they had underestimated this house and its guardian. The chaos lasted a few minutes, but for them, it was enough to understand that they were not facing a vulnerable old woman but a determined, cunning, and courageous spirit. Finally, disoriented and frustrated, they fled, leaving behind a few fallen objects and the return of silence. Grandmother, still breathless, leaned her cane against the armchair and watched the door. She knew they might return, better prepared this time. But she was ready. Her house wasn't just a place of memories, it had become a fortress, and she, its undisputed master. The next day, Grandma didn't just remain on alert behind her windows. She knew that to truly protect her home, she needed to understand who had tried to invade it and why. With her old notebook and a few photos of the neighborhood, she began discreetly questioning her neighbors and acquaintances. An elderly neighbor told her about a strange van seen nearby the day before, and about a group of young men loitering in the area. A mail carrier added that he had heard unusual noises near the alley the previous night. Every clue confirmed her suspicions. This wasn't a random burglary. Someone was looking for something specific, something only she possessed or knew about. Grandma then remembered a small wooden chest, hidden behind an old wardrobe in the attic. Inside were ancient documents, relics, and precious letters she had collected over decades, family secrets and evidence that some might have wanted to get their hands on at any cost. She spent the day securing the attic. Boards were reinforced, additional locks installed, and discreet traps set to alert anyone who tried to approach. Her house was no longer just defensive, it was a veritable labyrinth where every room could become an obstacle for intruders. As evening fell, Grandma sat in her armchair, her gaze sweeping through the dim light of the living room. She now knew that her adversaries would return, better prepared and bolder. But this knowledge gave her an advantage. She could anticipate their moves, foresee their mistakes, and surprise them. For the first time, a faint smile crossed her lips. She was no longer just the old woman from the forgotten alley, she had become a strategist, ready to protect her secrets and her home to the very end. And in the shadows, the intruders were beginning to wonder if their target wasn't more dangerous than they had imagined. In the days that followed, Grandma transformed her house into a veritable field of surprises for anyone who dared to enter. Every room, every hallway, every nook and cranny was carefully prepared. Discreet security wires, unstable buckets, obstacles camouflaged behind furniture, everything was designed to disorient and slow down intruders. But she didn't stop there. In the attic, she set up simple but effective devices, bells attached to ropes, fragile objects that would fall noisily if anyone ventured too close to the safe containing her precious documents. Every detail was meticulously planned, like a chessboard where she anticipated each of her opponent's moves. That evening, an unusual noise rattled the floorboards. Someone was trying to force open the side door. Grandma crept silently into the kitchen, taking a sturdy old broom in her hands. She watched the intruders through a crack in the door. They seemed confident, thinking the house would be easy to break into. They were about to find out how wrong they were. One of the intruders stepped onto a loose rug, a bucket tipped over, icy water splashing his shoes and making him stumble backward with a cry. The other tried to climb the stairs to the attic, but a small bell attached to a rope immediately jingled, signaling his presence. Grandma smiled, savoring every moment of this silent revenge. She also understood that this first indirect confrontation had given her a psychological advantage. The intruders were beginning to doubt their superiority, while the old woman maintained total control of the situation. That evening, as they walked away, humiliated and frustrated, Grandma knew the conflict was far from over. But she was ready. Her traps were set, her strategy calculated, and her resolve stronger than ever. Every future attempt at intrusion would be a test of cunning and courage, and she fully intended to emerge victorious. The house was no longer just a refuge, it had become a fortress, and she, the implacable guardian of his secrets and his security. A few nights later, Grandma sensed a change in the air. The wind seemed to carry foreign whispers, and gliding shadows were visible through the shutters. The intruders had returned, but this time they weren't just timidly entering, they had a plan. Around midnight, metallic sounds echoed outside. Tools, hooks, and muffled voices indicated they were trying to force the front door. Grandma, sitting in her armchair with her cane close at hand, calmly assessed the situation. She knew that this time, the confrontation would be direct and dangerous. Before getting up, she activated some of the traps she had set up around the house, buckets filled with unstable water, security wires to trigger improvised alarms, and objects placed to slow down intruders. Every step of unexpected visitors would be watched and every movement anticipated. When the door finally gave way under their efforts, two figures entered the hall, looking confident but tense. Grandmother then emerged from the shadows, her cane striking the floor forcefully. "You really thought you could just walk in here like that?" she snapped, her voice firm and icy. Taken by surprise, the intruders instinctively retreated, slipping on a loose rug and triggering the bucket of water. One of the men found himself facing an overturned chair which he violently struck, while the other tried to grab the chest in the attic, but a bell attached to a rope immediately rang, signaling his presence. Every action Grandma took was swift, calculated, and precise. She didn't just react, she controlled the space, transforming the house into a living trap. The intruders, increasingly disoriented and frustrated, realized they had underestimated not only the house, but above all, the woman who defended it. Finally, overcome by the old woman's confusion and ingenuity, they fled, leaving behind a carefully orchestrated chaos designed to slow their departure. Settling back into her armchair, Grandma caught her breath, a slight smile on her lips. She had won this battle, but she knew the war wasn't over. Someone truly wanted her secrets, and they would return, more determined and perhaps more dangerous. That night, she made a silent vow never to give in. Her home and her secrets would be protected at all costs, and she was prepared to do anything to achieve that. Grandma knew the intruders' flight was only temporary. The events of the past few nights had confirmed a simple truth: they would return, more determined, more cunning, and perhaps better prepared. But this time, she didn't just want to repel them. She wanted to find out who they were and why they were hunting her, and show them they had underestimated far more than a house, they had underestimated her. For several days, she silently planned. Ropes, bells, buckets, and various obstacles were strategically placed, but this time, some traps were designed to capture and detain rather than merely slow down. She identified blind spots, narrow passages, and likely entry points, transforming the house into a veritable labyrinth where every move of the intruders would be anticipated. She also prepared a diversionary plan. Lights left on in certain rooms, windows slightly open, and objects moved strategically would lure intruders to specific areas where her traps would be most effective. Night finally fell. The intruders returned, silent and confident, believing they could enter as before. But this time, the house itself seemed alive. As soon as they crossed the threshold, chaos erupted. A bucket of water slid across the floor, a bell rang, and wires pulled by Grandma triggered obstacles that slowed their progress. Caught in this meticulously prepared labyrinth, the intruders found themselves trapped in the main hall, unable to move without triggering a trap. Grandmother then appeared, firm and implacable, her silhouette illuminated by the glow of the lamps. "Now I want answers," she yelled, her gaze piercing. The intruders, trapped and realizing they had underestimated the old woman, began to stammer out excuses and threats. But Grandma, with her calculating calm, gave them no escape. She finally understood that these men were searching for ancient documents, letters, and secrets that her family had protected for generations. With every word exchanged, every gesture observed, she identified the group's leader and his accomplices. She now knew exactly who they were and what they wanted. And for the first time, she genuinely smiled. The final act was about to begin. The house crackled with tension. The intruders, now trapped in the hall, couldn't retreat without triggering another trap. Grandmother advanced slowly, cane in hand, each step deliberate. Her gaze fell upon the group's leader, a taller, more self-assured man than the others, but clearly unsettled by the old woman's resourcefulness. "You dared to come back," she said in a calm but icy voice. "Now it's time to talk." The chief, despite his usual arrogance, realized he had no room for maneuver. He began to reveal their intentions. They were looking for a chest containing old family documents, believing they could use them for personal gain. Grandmother listened attentively, nodding, each piece of information giving her a better grasp of the situation. Without wasting a second, she activated one last trap. A rope, expertly stretched, caused objects to fall in such a way as to block any escape. The intruders, seized by panic, realized they were completely at her mercy. "You thought you could steal my secrets," she said, "but you underestimated the guardian of this house." With surprising speed, she forced the leader to his knees, while the others, disoriented and humiliated, were immobilized by the obstacles she had prepared. Her movements were precise, controlled, without excessive violence, but enough to demonstrate her complete mastery of the situation. Then, Calmly, she picked up her phone and called the police, describing the situation and providing the necessary details for their arrest. The intruders, realizing they were now condemned by their own arrogance, had no choice but to remain motionless and face justice. When the sirens wailed in the distance, Grandma watched with satisfaction as the men dared to invade her home. Her house and its secrets were intact, protected by her courage, her cunning, and her determination. For the first time since this ordeal began, she felt free. The battle was won, but she knew her vigilance would always be necessary. Yet, that evening, she had proven a crucial truth: no one would ever again dare underestimate a determined and cunning grandmother. In the morning, the house was bathed in a soft, peaceful light. The first rays of sunlight illuminated the curtains, and for the first time in several nights, the silence was no longer heavy, but soothing. Grandmother sat down in her favorite armchair, a slight smile on her lips, her gaze fixed on the still-locked door. The police intervened during the night. The intruders were arrested, and their intentions were revealed. A simple theft had taken a dangerous turn because they had underestimated an elderly woman and her home. The precious documents, letters, and family heirlooms were untouched, carefully stored in the attic safe. Grandmother spent the morning inspecting every room, every trap, and every corner of her house. Everything was in order. The walls seemed to whisper their silent approval, mute witnesses to a victory won through cunning, courage, and determination. But beyond the house, something had changed within her. She now knew she could face any threat, that her age was not an obstacle but a strength. Fear had been replaced by certainty. She was capable of protecting what belonged to her, and no one would ever dare defy this house again without paying the price. That day, Grandma opened her windows, letting in the fresh air and sunshine. The neighbors, who had watched the events from afar, looked at her with newfound respect. Some murmured, "It's incredible what she did." And as she sat down to resume her knitting, a profound sense of satisfaction washed over her. Her home, her secrets, and her peace of mind had been saved. But above all, she had proven a universal truth: strength and cunning know neither age nor appearance. The old house, once silent and forgotten, now shone like a symbol of resilience and courage. And Grandma, serene and proud, knew that nothing and no one would disturb her peace again, at least, not unless she was ready to defend her kingdom.